Do you think you know the people around you? You believe you can identify when someone is toxic, when an energy is heavy, when a behavior crosses the line of what is acceptable. But what if I told you that the real dangers are not obvious? That the most destructive people are often charming, kind, even family members? And that while you try to protect yourself from the obvious villains, you are opening the doors of your mind to something infinitely more dangerous, the unconscious of others invading your own. Carl Gustav Jung dedicated his life to studying these hidden dynamics. In his work, The Ego and the Unconscious, he reveals that most of what truly governs us is not under our conscious control. This applies not just to you, it applies to everyone. And that is precisely where the danger lies. Because when someone is blind to their own darkness, that shadow seeks a host, and often that host is you. Perhaps you have never stopped to think about this, but think now. How many times have you felt emotionally drained after talking to someone? How many times have you been blamed for something you didn't do or treated as the savior of a tragedy that wasn't even yours? Jung called this projection, an unconscious mechanism where the other projects onto you what they refuse to see in themselves. From that moment on, you cease to be a person and become a symbol, a mirror, an imaginary enemy, an idealized hero. And all these images have something in common. None of them is truly you. But the most frightening part is that often you don't even realize you are in this game. You think you are helping, that you are being empathetic, that you are being mature. Meanwhile, you are sinking into a psychological field that is not yours, trying to resolve conflicts that are not yours, being manipulated by dynamics that were not created by you but now control you. And it's not just about ill-intentioned people. You made it clear. The greatest dangers do not come from conscious perverts, but from unintegrated, unconscious ones. They are those who live alienated from their own psyche, dominated by masks, traumas, complexes, and repressed desires. They are not evil, they are dangerous. And this danger is silent. It doesn't come in through the front door. It infiltrates slowly, daily, through small comments, veiled accusations, loaded silences, until you start to doubt yourself. And when you lose contact with your own psychic reality, you become part of their shadow. Perhaps you're going through exactly this right now, in a relationship, in a friendship, in a work environment, even within your own family. And perhaps you are blaming yourself, trying to understand what is wrong with you. The answer is nothing. But there is something deeply wrong with the way you are being used as a vessel for someone else's unconscious. In this video, we will expose one by one the 6 types of people that Jung would identify as emotionally dangerous types, that act not with deliberate malice, but with internal forces they themselves do not understand. And that is why they are so destructive. We will use Jung's words, his concepts, and warnings directly from his works, such as Aion, The Ego and the Unconscious, and Archetypes, and the collective unconscious, to show you how to recognize these profiles. But more than that, we will open your eyes to the possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, one or more of these profiles is within you as well. Are you ready? Then take a deep breath and move forward. But be warned, after hearing this, you will no longer be able to look at people, or even at yourself, the same way. Music. Imagine living with someone who blames you for everything they feel, who turns your presence into a trigger, who makes you feel responsible for emotions you never caused. At first, they seem fragile, sensitive, deep, but over time, you realize you are being dragged into a battlefield that isn't yours, and where you are already at a disadvantage. This is the unconscious manipulator, someone who is unaware of their own wounds, but projects them onto others as a form of psychic survival. Jung said, "What we do not confront in ourselves, we will encounter as fate." And often, this fate has a name, a face, and shares the table with you. The unconscious manipulator is someone dominated by repressed content, unintegrated traumas, unprocessed emotional fragments. Instead of looking inward, They aim at you and turn you into a canvas for their internal conflicts. This type of person lives in a state of chronic projection. According to Jung, projecting is an inevitable function of the psyche, but if unrecognized, it becomes destructive. In the book The Ego and the Unconscious, he states that projection causes a kind of psychic blindness, a prison where the other ceases to be seen as they are and becomes used as a symbol of what is hidden in us. This is exactly what the unconscious manipulator does. They do not see you. They see a lost part of themselves and react to it as if it were real. These people often position themselves as victims. Everything that happens is someone else's fault, never theirs. When they feel anger, it's because you provoked it. When they are sad, it's because you disappointed them. When they feel inferior, it's because you think you are superior. This distortion is so subtle that you start to question yourself. Was I really insensitive? Did I say something wrong? Am I toxic? And thus, manipulation occurs without a shout being heard, without a direct request being made. It's all emotional, unconscious, and absolutely effective. Worse still, often these people are charming. They have charisma, sensitivity, an aura of emotional intensity. This creates a trap because you think you can help them, heal them, understand them better than others. But what you are doing in practice is sacrificing your psychic health, trying to rescue someone who refuses to dive into themselves. And the more you try, the more you sink. Jung warns us that these patterns of projection are especially dangerous because they place us in a symbolic role, savior, enemy, traitor, father, mother, anything but who we really are. And living in a symbolic bond is living in an illusion. You cease to be seen as a subject and are treated as a distorted reflection of the other's unconscious. The only way to protect yourself from an unconscious manipulator is to develop awareness, recognize the patterns, cut the invisible threads that connect you to this person's emotional narrative, and most importantly, constantly ask yourself if what you are feeling is yours or has been induced, because the unconscious manipulator does not invade your life violently. They enter through the gap of your empathy, and once you recognize this pattern, the next step is to understand how it disguises itself even more deeply with the mask of the persona, the one who not only projects but acts, lives in order to appear as something they are not. In the next section, we will explore the bearer of the persona and how it represents one of the greatest psychological risks pointed out by Jung, because while the unconscious manipulator throws their conflicts onto you, the bearer of the persona can drag you into a world where even you forget who you really are. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Not all psychological danger comes from extreme behaviors. Sometimes it comes from what seems too perfect, from the ever-ready smile, from the impeccable posture, from the flawless image. We live in an era of appearances where being is less important than seeming. And this, for Jung, was a serious problem because when someone identifies too much with their own personate social mask we use to adapt to the world, they risk completely disconnecting from their essence. And those who live for the mask not only lose themselves but also begin to distort everyone around them. In the book The Ego and the Unconscious, Jung states that the persona is what someone is not, but what he and others think he is. In other words, an artificial construction shaped by social, familial, and professional expectations. In itself, the persona is not a mistake. We all use it. It allows us to fulfill social roles, to be a doctor, teacher, brother, friend. The problem begins when someone believes they are only that, when the mask sticks to the face and everything that is spontaneous, vulnerable, and authentic is locked in the basement of the psyche. The bearer of the persona is the master of functional superficiality. They say what others want to hear. They behave in the right way. They avoid conflicts at all costs. But behind the curtain of control, there is a soul in ruins, because the more they sustain the image, the more they suffocate the self. And this repression, sooner or later, exacts its price. For those who live with this type of person, the impact is profound. You feel that something is wrong, but you can't say what. There is a lack of spontaneity, of truth, of depth in the interactions. Everything seems rehearsed. And worse, the bearer of the persona projects this demand for perfection onto you as well. They expect you to perform, to fit in, to collaborate with the theater. If you express something outside the script, an intense emotion, a doubt, a pain, they retreat, become uncomfortable, shut down, because everything that reminds them of what is repressed within becomes unbearable. Jung warned that this type of identification with the persona is one of the greatest threats to the process of individuation, path of self-knowledge, and integration of the unconscious. For him, the real danger begins when the individual is hypnotized by the role they play, believing they are what others see. And that is exactly where the risk lies. When someone lives only to be accepted, recognized, praised, they become a hostage to their own facade. And everything that is genuine dies, suffocated behind the veneer. Living with someone like this can lead you to doubt your own spontaneity. You start to police yourself, to measure your words, to hide parts of yourself that don't fit the ideal narrative. Gradually, you also begin to wear a mask and don't even notice. Coexisting with a bearer of the persona is not just artificial, it is contagious. But there is something even darker than that, because when someone represses what they feel, think, and desire for too long, it doesn't disappear. It accumulates. It ferments in the unconscious until it transforms into shadow. And then we enter an even more dangerous territory, that of denied emotions that return with explosive force. In the next section, we will dive into the figure of the owner of the repressed shadow, the one who refuses to see their own dark side until it explodes. There is a type of person who lives controlled, polished, restrained, always correct, always moderate, always polite. But behind this veneer of balance lies a force about to break free, because everything they consider wrong, ugly, or unacceptable is simply pushed down into the basement of the soul. It is not overcome nor transformed. It is merely repressed. This is the essence of the owner of the repressed shadow, someone who tries to be light all the time until the darkness takes control. Carl Jung dedicated a good part of his work to understanding the shadow. In Aion, he states, "The shadow is everything that the individual refuses to recognize in themselves and yet insists on manifesting in some way." We are not talking about something external. The shadow is not the evil of the world. It is not the other. It is not the enemy. The shadow is internal. It is the hatred you do not admit to feeling. It is the envy you rationalize. It is the sexuality you repress. It is the ambition you disguise as humility. Everything you reject in yourself does not disappear. It transforms into shadow. And as Jung taught, what you do not make conscious directs your life, and you call it destiny. The owner of the repressed shadow does not seem dangerous at first glance. On the contrary, often they are someone admired, disciplined, kind, helpful. But there is something strange. They do not tolerate weakness in others. They react poorly to spontaneity. They are bothered by intense emotions. They always seem charged but never explode, until they do. And when that happens, it is devastating. This person lives in constant emotional vigilance. They do not allow themselves to feel, and for that reason, they condemn those who do. They do not allow themselves to err, and for that reason, they attack those who do. They become moralistic, demanding, controlling. But all of this is just an attempt to keep the unconscious under control. Jung was clear: the stronger the persona, the more repressed the shadow, and the more repressed the shadow, the more brutal its manifestation will be. You can identify this pattern in people who have disproportionate reactions, who explode over small things, who hold grudges for years, who sabotage relationships in a passive-aggressive manner. They are the famous difficult people whom no one understands why they are so bitter, so resentful, so critical. The answer lies in the shadow, unintegrated, unrecognized, unaccepted. And here is the most important point. The shadow is not just made of bad things. Jung made it clear that it also contains your denied potential, your repressed creativity, your hidden strength. But when the shadow is ignored, all of this turns into poison. And this poison contaminates the relationship, the environment, and especially those who are closest. Living with the owner of the repressed shadow is like living next to an emotional minefield. You never know where you are stepping until you are hit. But this repression does not arise from nowhere. Often, it is fed by an illusion of superiority, by a rigid moral ideal that turns guilt into a tool of control. This is where we enter the figure of the next type, the moral controller, someone who not only represses their own desires, but makes you feel guilty for living yours. In the next part, we will unmask this type that Jung saw as one of the greatest obstacles to psychic freedom, the guardian of virtue who, deep down, hides their own demons. Not every executioner carries a sword. Some use crosses, rules, dogmas, and ready-made phrases. They are those who claim to be driven by ethics, righteousness, and morality. But deep down, they are imprisoning themselves and others within a cage made of guilt and shame. Jung was well aware of this archetype. For him, when morality is used as a facade, it becomes one of the most insidious forms of psychic repression. This is the case of the moral controller, someone who, instead of integrating their shadow, projects it onto the behavior of others and condemns them for what they do not accept in themselves. You have certainly met someone like this, people who frequently point fingers but never look inward, who position themselves as a reference for behavior not because they truly are, but because they desperately need to maintain an image of moral superiority. According to Jung, the greater the repression, the more intense the need to project the shadow, and that is exactly what the moral controller does, transforms others into sinners, deviants, immoral, to avoid facing their own desires, impulses, and contradictions. The problem is that, unlike a common emotional manipulator, the moral controller believes they are doing good. They genuinely think they are correcting, saving, or educating the other. And this makes their influence even more toxic because it is cloaked in authority, good intentions, and false spirituality. The criticism comes accompanied by phrases like, "It's for your own good," "You'll thank me later," or "Someone needs to tell you the truth." But this truth is not neutral. It is laden with projection. In the book Aion, Jung extensively discusses the figure of Christ and the Antichrist as archetypes of wholeness and dissociation. The moral controller believes they are embodying the light but completely ignores their own darkness. They project evil onto others to maintain the illusion of purity within themselves, and this makes them blind, dangerous, unable to see the nuances of the human soul. If you live close to someone like this, you may start to feel constantly guilty, as if you are always wrong. Even when you are just living, you feel watched, judged, diminished. And the most perverse thing is that often you internalize this judgment. You begin to repress parts of yourself that are natural, human, spontaneous, and mold yourself to an ideal that is not yours. The morality of the other becomes your prison. This dynamic is common in families, religions, and rigid environments where obedience is confused with virtue. Jung saw this pattern as a real threat to the process of individuation. For where there is excessive moralism, there is an absence of self-knowledge. The extreme moralist does not want truth. They want control. And when they cannot control the external world, they begin to control the internal world of those around them. But the moral controller is not the only one guided by unconscious forces. There is another type that is even more volatile, unstable, and unpredictable, the complex. While the moralist represses and projects, the complex individual is completely dominated by unconscious contents and reacts from them like an emotional puppet. In the next part, we will dive into this explosive territory where consciousness loses control and traumas take the wheel of the psyche. Prepare to encounter the type of person who can embrace you today and destroy you tomorrow without even knowing why. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my book, Beyond the Shadow. It breaks down Jung's core ideas and gives you tools to understand yourself more deeply. The link is in the pinned comment. Imagine living with someone who at one moment is sweet, affectionate, generous, and in the next moment explodes in anger, shuts down in silence, or accuses you of something that never crossed your mind. A compliment turns into a demand. A joke becomes aggression. A gesture of affection is interpreted as a threat. No matter what you do, it seems you are always treading on unstable ground. This is the experience of those who live alongside a person dominated by unconscious complexes. For Jung, complexes are autonomous nuclei of emotion and memory that reside in the unconscious and can take control of consciousness at any moment. They are like fragmented personalities within us, created by traumas, psychic wounds, and unresolved experiences. In the book Psychological Types, and also in The Ego and the Unconscious, Jung describes how these complexes can directly interfere with an individual's behavior, causing them to react not to the present but to echoes of the past. A simple comment connects unconsciously to an old abandonment, rejection, or humiliation, and those nearby pay the price. The complexed person does not realize they are being guided by these internal forces. When they react with fury, extreme sadness, or exaggerated resentment, they believe they are being rational. But they are not. They are reliving undigested emotions. And the problem is that this does not happen consistently. It occurs in lapses. There are emotional explosions interspersed with moments of lucidity, affection, or regret. This makes the bond with such a person even more confusing and addictive. You start to think they are not always like this. Sometimes they are wonderful. And that is exactly what keeps you hooked, because there are moments of genuine connection, of true affection. But these moments are followed by unpredictable ruptures where you find yourself in the midst of an emotional storm that you do not understand. And in an attempt to restore harmony, you mold yourself, adapt, shrink. You start to avoid certain topics, measure your words, walk on eggshells to avoid waking the monster that sleeps within the other person. But here's the brutal truth. That monster is not awakened by you. It is always there, latent, hungry, waiting for any trigger to emerge. And when it does emerge, it consumes everything around it. For Jung, unrecognized complexes end up colonizing the psyche. They speak for you, feel for you, act for you. And in the case of the complexed person, this takeover happens frequently. They may be dominated by a complex of inferiority, martyrdom, abandonment, persecution, each with its narratives, its emotions, its demands. And the more you try to maintain peace, the more you feed the illusion that it is possible to control the uncontrollable. Being close to someone like this is to live in constant alert. There is never emotional stability. The present is always contaminated by ghosts, and sooner or later, you begin to absorb these ghosts. You start to doubt yourself, your memory, your feelings. And without realizing it, you too are being colonized by the other's unconscious. But the most dangerous part is yet to come, because while the complexed person oscillates between emotional extremes, there is another type of person who does not shout, does not explode, does not accuse, but consumes your energy until you have nothing left. In the next and final section, we will talk about the psychic vampire, the one who feeds on your time, your attention, your empathy, and leaves you exhausted, drained, empty. And with them, we will close this cycle by revealing what Jung truly believed to be the way out of this unconscious jungle. Some people don't want your presence, they want your energy, and they will do everything to drain it, not with violence, nor with explicit aggression, but with subtle demands, chronic victimhood, emotional dependency camouflaged as affection. This is the psychic vampire, the most silent and insidious form of emotional draining that Carl Jung ever warned about, even if not by that name. Because in Jungian language, it is the symbol of the unresolved symbiotic relationship, the pathological bond that hinders psychic growth and dissolves the contours of the self. Jung, in various passages of the ego and the unconscious, and in Aion, shows us that one of the greatest threats to the process of individuation path towards wholeness is symbiotic relationships, where two people do not recognize themselves as separate individuals, but as psychic extensions of one another. The psychic vampire lives exactly in this type of connection. They need your constant attention, your daily comfort, your being available all the time. But behind the neediness, there is a void that is not yours and that you will never be able to fill. You start by offering support, then you give time, then you tolerate emotional abuse in the name of understanding, until you realize that all your energy is being drained and that you no longer know where the other ends and where you begin. The exhaustion is profound. It is not just physical, it is existential. It feels as if your soul is being devoured drop by drop, day after day. Jung spoke of people who, unable to sustain themselves psychically, attach to others like emotional parasites. And as cruel as it may seem, this is the truth. The psychic vampire does not want to grow, they want to be carried. But the danger is not just in the exhaustion, it is in the dissolution of the self. You start to feel guilty for wanting space, selfish for wanting silence, cold for wanting distance, because the psychic vampire is a master at reversing roles. From victim, they become accuser. From needy, they become manipulator. And before you realize it, you are living to avoid crisis, to maintain peace, to sustain a bond that is killing you inside. Jung offers us a path to make the unconscious conscious. And this applies to both others and ourselves. Because perhaps at some point in life, you too have been a psychic vampire, or a complexed person, or a bearer of the persona. None of us is immune. We all have shadow. We all have pain. The difference lies in who has the courage to look within and who chooses to project that weight onto others. This video was a mirror that dive into the dynamics that bind us, hurt us, and keep us unconscious. If you've made it this far, it means you are ready to see, to name, to break free. And this is the first and most powerful form of freedom. It is not about blaming others, but about stepping out of the hostage position, about reclaiming sovereignty over your own psyche. Now I want you to participate. Leave in the comments which of these profiles you have faced, and which do you honestly perceive within yourself. Your comment could be the beginning of awareness and of those who read it. And before you go, an important notice. The next video is also essential. It will take you even deeper into this journey of self-knowledge. So keep watching. You need to see, because the more light we shed on the unconscious, the less it controls us. See you there.